On February 24th, 1933, gangsters gunned down Dennis Ziegler here in Chicago. Ziegler died in his son's arms. He leaves behind 11 children and his wife, Edna.
I'm Lissa Morgans, and you're listening to Call Edna. Previously on Call Edna. In the Chicago Tribune on March 27, 1943, Edna provides the three names that her husband gave to her if he was ever murdered: William Maloney, John Lynch, and Lloyd Little. We have John Lynch. He's described as Maloney's shadow. And also, according to Local 150's current website, when Maloney moved to D.C., Lynch stepped into his role, like his literal shadow coming to light, becoming the president and business manager of Local 150 and holding on to that position until 1952. And then we have Lloyd Little. He seems to be the lesser-known figure of the three, and in 1930, he's also a business agent with Local 150. William Green was the then president of the American Federation of Labor. That Bruce approached him in the months leading up to his murder, saying that there was a lot happening at his local that he needed help with. But Green shrugged him off, saying that Bruce was against the Brotherhood and was just trying to split the unions. Episode 16, The Rest. Hello and welcome back to Call Edna, the podcast where I'm solving my great-great-grandfather's Prohibition-era murder. As always, if you want to follow along with the pod, feel free to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, YouTube, etc. And if you want to participate in the last episode of Call Edna and leave me a voicemail with your thoughts on who murdered Bruce and why, and if that means who you think pulled the trigger or the people who coordinated and orchestrated it behind the scenes, as it's pretty clear how premeditated it is, feel free. Leave a voicemail at 202-656-7391, and I'll be playing a select few in the last episode at the end of this month. We're discussing three people in today's episode. The first two are the remaining men from Edna's list, Lloyd Little and John Lynch. For context, her original list was three people, and the other man was William Maloney, who we've already discussed. And the third person for today's episode is the add-on name that their daughter, Dodie Ziegler, put in letters concerning Bruce's murder, and that's William Green, the then president of the American Federation of Labor. And I'll start by saying I don't have a ton on Little or Lynch, so I want to discuss them first, because there is a lot to discuss about William Green. So let's get started. To begin, Lynch and Little were part of the group involved in TNT, along with William Maloney. And at the time of TNT's mistrial in November of 1932, Lloyd Little is officially listed as a business agent for the Hoisting, Portable, and Shovel Engineers Union, Local 150. And Lynch is listed as the former president of Local 150. For completeness, and because I was curious, and I'm sure you are as well, we haven't discussed exactly how TNT fizzled at the end of the day, but I found an accounting in Westbrook Pegler's papers where he wrote to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in 1942, inquiring about any indictments involving William Maloney, and he was informed that there was only one, TNT, which resulted in a mistrial before Judge Brothers in November of 1934, and then there was a new trial in May of 1935, not involving Maloney, but several of the other defendants, which resulted in a not guilty verdict. And so the remaining defendants, like Maloney, had their cases nol prost, which, as we know, is when the prosecutor voluntarily dismisses them. And with that in place, let's turn to John Lynch. Lynch is Maloney's right-hand man the entirety of his career, and at times I even saw him called Maloney's bodyguard. And we learned in the episode on Maloney, the Snake, that they were living together in the same place in 1940, according to U.S. Census records. And they spent a lot of time together, originally in Chicago and also in Miami, which was a popular meeting and vacation spot for racketeers, members of organized crime, and people touching those communities in general, in the 1940s and 1950s. Given that I didn't have a ton of information on Lynch, I wanted to look at the times where he had encounters with Bruce and if any of those encounters had ever been violent. And the first encounter is one that we already know of. He was the other person, along with William Maloney, who chased Bruce through the Board of Trade area in February of 1932. So he's someone who we have a direct threat against Bruce from. And that accounting is solid. It was confirmed at the time and then part of the McClellan hearings in the 1950s. But something that I didn't know is just how much he coordinated with gangsters for William Maloney. And in a letter written to Westbrook Pegler that I found, but not signed, described Lynch as the man who coordinated the group of men who showed up as bodyguards at an event for the new president of the International, John Polsel, after Huddle's death when Maloney was in the hospital. If you recall, Maloney received a huge gift from Mike Carrazzo and then was asked by Polsel to send some men to help guard him at an event because other people were interested in becoming head of the International. And this letter describes that it was Lynch who did this coordinating for Maloney. So Lynch was a person who was able, on Maloney's behalf, to contact different gangsters in Al Capone's unit. And in terms of his personal life, I really didn't find much out about him. And it seems like the most important relationship in his life, at least preserved by newspapers and other things I went through, was his business relationship with William Maloney. Not only are they caught up with the TNT case in the 1930s, but they're also caught up in the same antitrust scandal that Mike Carrazzo was caught up in June of 1940. According to the June 25, 1940 Chicago Tribune, Maloney, Lynch, and others were also part of the group indicted. And if you're thinking, Lissa, you just told me in 1942 the Cook County State's Attorney's Office said the only indictment he was involved in was TNT, then you would be correct. But I found multiple sources that said Maloney and Lynch were both indicted on this case as well. They described the conspiracy that Carrazzo set and how he used strikes and threats to strike, but without benefiting the rank-and-file members themselves. Quoting, "The conspiracy among the defendants," the indictment said, quote, "was not intended to increase wages, shorten hours of labor, better working conditions, or promote or effectuate any other legitimate or normal object of a labor union," end quote. And I think this is particularly important to point out because I am offering so many critiques of individuals who work in labor unions, but I'm offering those critiques as people who are working in the labor system but against labor itself. And I want to make that very clear. And that's all I have on Lynch. And although it's not very much, there's some pretty damning stuff here. We know that he coordinated gangland thugs for Maloney in 1931. We know that he threatened Bruce with Maloney in 1932, and that he had the connections to potentially help coordinate a hit again if Maloney had ordered it in 1933. We also know that he was involved in the paving industry in 1940, and if how long these rackets go on tells us anything, this racket was definitely the same one going on in February of 1933, where Bruce contacted Sumner saying that there was quite a racket going on in the paving industry. And in past episodes, I was trying to find the exact paving contract that Bruce was talking about. But when I went back to my research and kept looking for more, I realized it wasn't likely a specific contract that Bruce was talking about. I think he was just talking about the state of the paving industry in general at that time based on the massive changes it was undergoing. From the True Republican on January 4th of 1933, in an article entitled, "Let Largest Paving Contract in Years." Quoting, "The largest letting in the history of the state's road building and program was completed a few days ago, when bids were received on contracts totaling $5,433,241.91 worth of state road work. Bids were received for 220.8 miles of paving and 0.48 miles of tile drainage. A majority of the contracts were for Cook County and northern Illinois. A large number, however, were for roads in the extreme southern portion and a few in central Illinois." End quote. And this amount only increased as 1933 went on. According to the Southside News on July 20th of 1933, in an article entitled "Millions Will Be Spent to Improve City Streets." It asserts that there was actually over $18 million of federal and highway funds that were going to be used to improve highways around Illinois, with $4 million actually being spent in Chicago itself. And it said something particularly interesting, quoting, "The largest portion of this money will go for labor," end quote. So to me, it's clear that Bruce was talking about this racket in general and how many bids they were likely rigging at this time when there was so much opportunity. So I don't think I need to continue to pursue the is it Lake County, Indiana or Lake County, Illinois debate. If we look at the article from the True Republican, they're talking about Cook County in northern Illinois, which would be Lake County, Illinois. And regardless, I don't think it would really matter since I've come to the conclusion that we're not looking for one specific contract, but rather one specific racket. And that racket is led by Mike Carrazzo with accomplices William Maloney and John Lynch. Next up is Lloyd Little. So I know the least about Lloyd Little, but the information I did find on him, which was mostly contained in my family's files, is some of the most interesting information that I found. And so it was curious to me that it involved Lloyd Little by name, someone who hasn't really come up that much. Although he was named by Edna because Bruce named him, he seems like he was a much smaller figure than Lynch and Maloney and others involved in 150. But from unmarked articles, which I'm guessing are from the Chicago Daily News, stamped on September 7th of 1932, it turns out that Bruce had actually filed a complaint against Lloyd Little and William Maloney, essentially for harassment and intimidation. And at that time, Bruce was appearing in municipal court in Chicago to testify against them on his charges of intimidation and loitering outside the union headquarters of Local 569 at 643 West Washington Boulevard. And apparently, Bruce had called the police about it. And in classic fashion, Little and Maloney did not want Bruce to go forward and testify. So, apparently the night before the hearing, quoting from the paper, Ziegler notified the police and State's Attorney Swanson that his wife was warned by telephone that if her husband went into court, he would not live to testify at another hearing, end quote. And there's something juicier. They were apparently arrested, I'm guessing for questioning, on this complaint. Quoting, "About 2 weeks ago, William E. Maloney, 5th Vice President of the International Union of Operating Engineers, and Lloyd Little of the same organization were arrested on complaint of Ziegler. Local Union number 569 was holding a meeting with representatives of the same group of engineers from other parts of the country with a view to reforming the American Federation of Operating Engineers, when Maloney and Little were accused of loitering and intimidation. A permanent injunction was obtained more than a year ago, preventing Maloney's organization from interfering with the one which Ziegler is identified," end quote. So this is September of 1932. So the federal lawsuit is ongoing, and I'm guessing is part of the subject of this meeting that they're having in Chicago. It sounds like it's members of Local 569, and it's also other plaintiff representatives, like Bruce was for Chicago, from the other cities, talking to Bruce's local. And it sounds like Little and Maloney have staked out the meeting and are intimidating the people there. And you may have caught that I said State's Attorney Swanson, because it's 1932, and so we don't have Thomas Courtney's State's Attorney's office yet. And we know from the police protection and other things that Swanson's office was much more sympathetic to Bruce than Courtney's is. And it's interesting that this involves Little and not Lynch. So in some ways, I'm wondering if Little acted as maybe a third in command, as we have now another direct example of someone threatening Bruce. Although unlike the example with Maloney and Lynch, this one is to a group of people in general and not just directed at Bruce himself. And this is pretty much all I have on Little for you. And although it's not very much, it's little. What we do have is quite heavy because Bruce went to court over Little intimidating him in his union. So not only was Bruce involved in the 2 Cook County injunction cases, plus the federal lawsuit in D.C., He was also involved in his own complaint against these two for intimidation. So Bruce had a lot going on in the legal system, and I didn't know any of this before I started the investigation. And let's move on to William Green. There's a lot more on William Green because he was quite a prominent figure. As it relates to Bruce, he was president of the American Federation of Labor, or AFL as I've been calling it, from 1924 to 1952, and he became president after Samuel Gompers, a big name in organized labor. And I was quite impressed by his background for representing labor, because when he was 16 years old, he worked in coal mines in Ohio. And through that work, he was then elected secretary of his coal union and rose through the ranks with United Mine Workers of America. After that, he served in the Ohio Senate, and he eventually became president of the AFL. And that's a position he holds until his death in 1952. And in terms of his relationship with Bruce, they corresponded a lot, particularly from 1930 to 1931. I have at least 40 letters from Green alone addressed in that time period, although many of the letters from Bruce to Green were not included in the file, and they're all regarding the fight against Huddle and the International Union of Operating Engineers. And as we know from episode 5, the committee, Bruce reached out to Green for help with racketeering 1 month before his murder, and Green brushed him off. And I learned about the information from the committee first. So I didn't know that Bruce and Green had a long-standing friendship and relationship prior to that correspondence. In reading through these letters and understanding their relationship, I'm more and more confused about what exactly happened between the two of them, as they seem pretty lockstep on most things, with the exception of one letter. And because I didn't have Bruce's letters to Green but had Green's to Bruce, I was curious if I would be able to obtain any information on Bruce or his union or the federal court case, so I went to the special collections at the University of Maryland, which has some of William Green's papers. He also has another, larger collection at the State Historical Society of Wisconsin. But both collections are primarily concerned with his policy making while he was president of the AFL. And that really didn't include what was happening with Bruce in his union. So I found nothing on Bruce as an individual, and nothing really on this federal lawsuit or these projects going on at the time. But I was able to find one telegram that was particularly interesting. And because I have so much correspondence between these two, and the relationship worsens over time, I'm going to take you through a chronological journey starting on January 15th of 1930. Green's letter to Bruce, January 15, 1930. Quote, "I'm glad to learn you have Huddle on the run in Chai. It is damn near time you got a break. Your battle there has been just about as discouraging as ours here, and it looks as if we are both getting the breaks at the same time, only we are hammering him through the Department of Justice." End quote. Something I learned from these papers with Green is that not only was Green involved in the federal lawsuit that Bruce was involved in, although from a more behind-the-scenes perspective, he was one of the main people coordinating with the U.S. government, specifically the Department of Justice, regarding these various racketeers. And although this January 15th letter didn't have anything that damning or super interesting in it, I wanted to include it because it showed that as of January 15th of 1930, Bruce and Green were friendly, and they were united against Huddle and the others who ran the International, and they would be for years to come. But on January 17th, 1930, I found something in William Green's papers, and that's that he sent a telegram to Arthur Huddle with the following message. Quote, "Please meet me at the Tampa Terrace Hotel, Tampa, Florida, not later than Sunday noon. Without fail, must see you on a matter of great importance. Very urgent. Please answer. Serrano Hotel." End quote. From other correspondence at this time, I found that Green was in Florida as part of an executive council meeting. But from all the letters I read between Green and Bruce, at no point in time did I ever consider that Green was actually talking or meeting with Huddle in person. I mean, the way he speaks about Huddle is that he's enemy number one and has to be taken down at all costs, no matter what. So I got the impression that their relationship was so bad that they no longer interacted. But this telegram shows me that wasn't quite the case. Moving on in their relationship, a letter to Bruce, May 14th, 1930. Quote, I tried to cover the entire situation briefly as possible and still not slight anyone, particularly our benevolent General President. You will find it plenty heavy, but I have arrived at the conclusion that the time is past for any soft-headed stuff, and we've got to fight now as we never did before. Blah, 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 blah. Every man engaged in this fight will know upon reading it that every charge contained therein is true, same as the one sent to the Senate, and I have no doubt that you will get plenty of men to sign on the dotted line, end quote. So this is Bruce and Green organizing members of Local 569 likely to join the lawsuit, which was filed in January of 1930. Another reason why I thought it was so interesting after they sued him, that Green wanted to meet with Huddle in Florida. From Green to Bruce, October 9th, 1930. Quote, I had a little run-in with Harry same day. Arrived home, gave him a crack on the jaw, and he pulled the gun, then didn't have the guts to use it, end quote. I included this one because I wasn't sure if this was a joke or serious. Maybe this is just how men acted at the time, but if you're going to punch someone, I'm going to put that in the category of noted violent behavior. Moving on, from Green to Bruce, January 5th of 1931. Quote, action is beginning to come on the petition sent to President Hoover, and we may still see Huddle behind the bars, end quote. So not only were they coordinating this federal court case against Huddle, they were also doing some lobbying with President Hoover regarding what Huddle was up to. And in January of 1931, they exchanged a lot of letters back and forth. And this is when Green indicates to Bruce that Bruce is going to need to come to D.C. and that he's going to testify against a group of the racketeers on the record to have that as evidence against them. So these two are really coordinating a lot of actions against Huddle, and they're also gathering some pretty specific and damning evidence regarding an incident that happened in 1929 with the Turner Construction Company. And when I was rereading through these letters between Green and Bruce, the construction company's name sounded familiar for some reason. Green to Bruce, from January 22nd of 1931. Quoting, your welcome letter received this AM. Would be glad indeed to get the date on the Lundoff-Bicknell Company affair, likewise that of the Turner Construction Company. Also any dope on holding up contractors for cash to settle strikes you may have an inkling of, end quote. And I realized I had seen something on the Turner Construction Company elsewhere in Bruce's files, and that's that Bruce had made a list of the union members of Local 569 and where they lived in Chicago, Illinois, with the following blurb. Quote, the following is a list of engineers who were the members of Local Union 569 who were employed by the Turner Construction Company on their work being done for the Western Electric Company in Chicago. These men were all discharged on September 21st, 1929, by orders of Mr. Joseph Grady, who was in charge of said work for the Turner Construction Co. He gave his reason as that he had been notified by the New York office of said company that the men would have to join so-called 150, or the work being done by Turner Co. in the other cities would be struck, end quote. So this was another way 150 was intimidating Bruce and other men to join them, by literally pulling them off jobs by threatening the people who had employed them that they were going to lose workers in other cities as well. And there was a similar incident in October of 1929 involving the Lundoff-Bicknell Company with Arthur Huddle. And I think this would have been a really important example for them to include in their federal lawsuit seeking injunctive relief. because in the legal world, specific examples of factual representations are the best way forward. And if you put that information in your complaint under the big header of they're intimidating us, here's an example, it's a pretty good way to get past motion to dismiss. And this is a great accounting of one because we have the date, the men involved, and exactly what happened. Moving on to March 28th of 1931. Quoting, "Sorry to hear the sad news concerning your father. Here's hoping you remain on this earth as long as he did. One more struggle like this one we are in now, and I will never see 50, end quote. I had to include this because it's Green talking to Bruce about death. And Bruce's father had recently passed, news he had shared with Green indicating a personal friendship, and his father was actually in his 90s and had served in the Civil War, if you can believe it. And I read the eerie sentence in my head. Here's hoping you remain on this earth as long as he did. Coming from William Green, the man that Bruce is going to reach out to a month prior to his murder, who refuses to help him. Then we have April of 1931. Not a letter to Bruce, but I had to include this because I think it's so interesting. There's an event at this time that is quite scandalous in DC, where a woman takes a horsewhip, a leather horsewhip, and whips one of the union officials who's accused of racketeering, the same man who may be Green punched in the face. From the Searchlight, which reprinted this from the Evening Star on April 1st of 1931, quoting, "Labor troubles in Washington reached a climax yesterday afternoon when Mrs. Robert Stevens, 33, of 6520 First Street, wielding a leather horsewhip, severely lashed Charles E. Howry, local supervisor of the International Union of Operating Engineers. The horsewhipping took place shortly after 5 o'clock at 10th and K Streets, in front of the Carpenters Union building. Mrs. Stevens, wife of a former member of the union, had waited half an hour in front of the building for Howry to leave his office. As he walked out the door, the woman, with the whip concealed under her coat, walked up and accused him of keeping her husband out of work. After a few words had been exchanged, she threw back her coat and struck the man across the face with the whip. Howry grabbed at her, and a man standing nearby struck him with his fist. This was a signal for a free-for-all fight. While a dozen unidentified men paired off in individual combat, Mrs. Stevens continued to rain blows on Howry with the whip. Blah, blah, blah. The fights between friends of Howry and the other men, believed to have been friends of Mrs. Stevens, continued for several minutes and attracted the attention of scores of pedestrians before the last of the combatants disappeared. Blah, blah, blah. Two friends of Mrs. Stevens, William I. Green and Robert Ely, both former members of the union, said she attacked Howry because she believed he was responsible for keeping her husband from securing employment. Blah, 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 blah. According to Green and Ely, the system of supervisors recently installed has destroyed local self-government in the union and deprived the members of any voice in the management and conduct of their business affairs. End quote. And I love this account because Green is on the side of this woman who literally brings a horsewhip to beat up this man. Not that I condone violence, but it's quite a radical picture that's painted. Moving on to April 11th of 1931, and a letter not just addressed to Bruce, but to a whole list of people who were plaintiff representatives in the lawsuit. I'm not going to quote from this letter because it contains a little more legalese than I would like, but it's essentially saying that Green and Ely are going to be representing them all in Washington on behalf of their unions, and that they're authorized to represent all the named people before the Department of Justice's investigation. And there's more news that comes in May, specifically in a letter from Green to Bruce on May 14, 1931, saying that there was an IRS agent in New York who was investigating a man named Comerford, another one of the main racketeers, along with Huddle as part of the International. And he says, quote, "One may be looking at Maloney and the gang up in the near future, and of course he will call on your help, and I rather imagine he won't be turned down." End quote. Later that month, the letters continue much in the same vein, and it's clear they have a lot of lines of attack against Huddle, but even after Huddle dies in June of 1931, they continue on their fight against the others who were very complicit in his regime, like Polsel and Comerford and Maloney. And before we work our way up to 1933, I just wanted to read probably the most disturbing letter I found between Greene and Bruce. And this one was out of context. I don't have Bruce's response, and I don't have other letters within the same time period. So it's sort of standing all on its own. And I really don't know what to make of it. But it indicates animosity in their relationship brewing. A letter to Bruce, June 18th, 1932. Quoting, "What in the hell is the matter with you? After telling me not to be concerned about the press club bunch, you have finally fell for their poisonous crap. Or are you just laying low on account of warm weather? I'm not writing this letter just to account of the recent favorable decision in New York, but I'm writing it on account of the friendship we've enjoyed in this struggle in the past, and think I'm entitled to an explanation if there has been or is to be in the future. To tell you the truth, Bruce, if I thought you had been boob enough to fall for Tony's poison, I would not write asking what is it all about. But I'm inclined to believe, from what I might have heard, that Eli has been spreading some dirty lies that would make anyone distrust me. With the exception of 3 or 4 of Howry's ex-scabs, no one has anything to do with him here, as they have learned what it is all about." End quote. So I picked the letters that I wanted to read you today to give context to this one. You know that Eli is the man that Greene was working very close with in Washington, and Howry was a racketeer in D.C., who ends up being horsewhipped and maybe Greene hit at one time, who's on the outs of the organization in 1932. I don't know who the press club bunch are or who Tony is, but Greene notes that he has a long-standing friendship with Bruce, and that also there's been a fracture between him and Eli, and that maybe Bruce has heard rumors regarding Greene. And I don't know if those rumors are true or not, but I do know this is the last correspondence I found between the two of them. In general, there was a lack of correspondence from the latter half of 1932 and 1933 in Bruce's files, so they could have kept talking, but I'm not exactly sure what happened to their relationship. And before we get into the letters from the committee, I just want to say that Greene signs almost all of his letters to Bruce with the following signature line, "Yours as ever." And there's a few that don't have "yours as ever," but they have variations of it, like "yours for the cause, William Greene," "yours in the fight as ever, William Greene," "yours for Huddle's finish, William Greene," or "as ever yours, William Greene." And this sign-off seemed personal. And I noticed when I reviewed the letters back from the committee that William Greene signed off his letter, "Very sincerely yours." Seems a lot colder than "yours as ever," or "yours in the fight as ever." And now we have the letters that were read during the McClellan Committee hearings between Bruce and Greene from January and February of 1933.
The first letter was written to Mr. Greene on January 9, 1933 by Mr. Ziegler. He stated in part, "I am taking the liberty of writing you in the interest of a very large number of engineers, hoisting, portable, and stationary, located in various cities and towns in the United States. These men were for many years a large majority and still are the members of the International Union of Operating Engineers. Because of the many abuses existing within the International Union of Operating Engineers for several years past and still being practiced by the officers of the International Union of Operating Engineers, the rank and file of our organization has completely lost confidence in the integrity and ability of the officers of the International. Many of the officers have so muscled their way into many of the local unions that members feel it is impossible ever again to have the International Union again function as it should, in the interest of the members and in accordance with the principles of the AFL." He goes on to say, "The membership of the organization is sick and tired and disgusted with being classified as being dominated and controlled by the worst form of racketeers, hoodlums, and murderers in America. We want and demand freedom from this stigma." He closes the letter saying, "In conclusion, I desire to make this clear to you, Brother Greene. This is not a hasty, ill-advised action by a handful of either disgraced or disgruntled members. But on the contrary, among our men are to be found the very best mechanics, and old-time members are in the vast majority. We have a keen sense of responsibility. We fully realize that if we are to have a good, clean, honest, and efficient organization, it is up to the membership to make it so. I do not hesitate to say to you that if we are granted the charter we ask in less than 6 months' time from the date of issue, We will show you a larger membership than now exists in the corrupt International Union of Operating Engineers. And in 1 year, we will exceed any previous record for membership. Fraternally yours, Dennis B. Ziegler.
Green provided in response.
I would strongly advise against the action which you are planning to take. It will serve no good purpose. If you have complaints against the administration of the officers of the existing organization of operating engineers, surely there is a way by which your complaint can be considered and adjusted. No good purpose can be served by splitting the organization of operating engineers, dividing it into hostile camps fighting each other instead of fighting together. I repeat again, I strongly urge you to desist from taking action which you state you and those associated with you are planning to take. Very sincerely yours, William E. Green. He wrote another letter to Mr. Green on January 18th, 1933. In your letter, you say, "There is surely a way by which our complaints can be considered and adjusted. Do you have in mind any method by which this can be done, or any tribunals to which we may go? We are not permitted to assemble in convention." Whole local unions are voted by supervisors appointed by the President of the International. Other local unions are bodily disenfranchised. The votes of other local unions are flagrantly miscounted, so that we may be denied the privilege of assembling in convention and correcting the ills from which the organization suffers. In the absence of a convention, the only remaining tribunal is the officers themselves, whom we charge with misconduct. Are they to be permitted to pass upon the propriety of their own acts? Are they to be the judges of their own stewardship? What chance do we have to have our complaints considered and adjusted?
Also from this time period, on January 31st of 1933, from the Engineers Bulletin, is a demand for William Green to suspend the charter of the International Union of Operating Engineers based upon an income tax evasion conviction of Patrick Comerford in New York City. This is one of the men in 1930 and 31 that Green was helping build a case against. And finally, in 1933, the case sticks, and he is convicted of income tax evasion. And the last piece of information that I have regarding Green before Bruce's murder is that just prior to his murder on February 5th of 1933, it's reported in the news that Green has been offered a cabinet position for Secretary of Labor in FDR's new government. But if you know anything about FDR's cabinet or labor history, this does not end up happening because Frances Perkins becomes Secretary of Labor, and she's the first woman to hold this cabinet post. And I thought this was a particularly interesting find because I think it places Green in context at the time when he's writing to Bruce. And instead of the friend that we knew from 1930 and 1931 who was working alongside Bruce, now Green thinks he might have a cabinet position. And I think he's become increasingly political as a result. And when you become more political, sometimes you make sacrifices. And I wonder if him standing up to Bruce was one of those sacrifices. And another one of those sacrifices seems to be working with William Maloney. Maloney, the man who Green wrote to Bruce about in 1931, who they essentially joked about because he was so corrupt and involved in the racketeering movement, becomes someone who Green works with in the 1940s and 50s. And there's actually a lot of correspondence in the year Green dies between him and Maloney, all very businesslike, as if they're just colleagues. And after Bruce's death, I didn't find any public statement or anything in his papers that reflected him thinking about Bruce and Bruce's death. The closest thing I found was in the 1940s, where Green writes a letter to Westbrook Pegler, which is contained in Pegler's papers, on September 29, 1944, concerning his work with racketeering, and Green provides Pegler with a copy of the International Union of Operating Engineers Convention notes, calling it a good time affair, and saying that the executive board failed to reach significant improvement for the rank-and-file workers, such as increasing the death benefit funds up to $500. And he said, quote, "We're hogtied to correct these abuses ourselves." And he also mentioned that he was a consistent reader of Pegler's articles that were about unionism. And I thought this was particularly interesting because this letter is September 29th of 1944. And there are articles in May, June, and July from 1943 regarding Green, unionism, and Bruce's murder, published by Pegler himself. So I'm assuming it's quite likely that Green had read these accounts, and they were quite critical of him. The one on May 22nd of 1943 called Green a friend and defender of bad men, and accused him of repeatedly siding with criminal and other union racketeers who were plainly exploiters and oppressors of the rank and file, and that he did so to keep his position. And in June 23rd of 1943, Pegler publishes the letter correspondence between Bruce and Green and paints Green in a really negative light, showing that he failed to help Bruce and then became friends with Maloney. Quoting, "As Maloney rose in the racket and the dirty underworld politics of unionism and the New Deal machine of Chicago, he grew rich and rose even higher in Green's favor. On August 15, 1941, the mob and a lot of visiting racketeers, including Fay, attended a testimonial dinner for Maloney in Chicago, and Will Green attended in his official person as president of the American Federation of Labor. And this is what Green said of Maloney that night. Quote, "Among other things, Bill Maloney is a highly efficient administrator and executive of great talent. And more than that, though there is no need to tell you people here tonight who know Bill, a loyal, intelligent, honest, courageous leader of organized labor." End quote. That's what Green said about William Maloney publicly in 1941. But does that mean he was involved in Bruce's murder? I tend to think no. I think Green is another example of someone who's foiled by politics and begins playing the political game, and that means he takes losses from time to time. One of those losses being sticking up for Bruce, and another one of those losses meant working with Maloney, either because he couldn't get rid of him or he simply had other more pressing things to do. And another thing about Green that I thought was a little sneaky of him was in that letter to Westbrook Pegler from September 24th of 1944, he signs it off saying, quote, "I could sign incognito, but I have faith in you and realize that you would do nothing to hurt me and in the work I pursue as an operating engineer. Will you destroy this letter after you read it? Thank you, W. Green," end quote. And Pegler did not destroy that letter, as I sat in that library in January of 2026 reading it. And he did this to Bruce from time to time as well. In another letter he wrote to Bruce from our family files, quote, "Since the contents of this letter could be made capital of both by our enemies and the buzzards, to the disadvantage of you and ourselves and the rest of the outlaws, you will agree that it had best be considered as strictly personal," end quote. So Green indicated he trusted Bruce essentially to maybe destroy this letter or keep it personal, just as he did with Pegler, but I'm not sure he actually meant it. I don't know if that was a way of him thinking he could control these individuals or the information he provided therein, or if he really believed particularly Bruce to be a friend. And that's something I don't think I'm going to know. So what's next? William Green, Lloyd Little, and John Lynch are the concluding members of our list. But I know the list and the number of suspects we've considered is lengthy. So after this episode, I will be posting 2 things on Instagram and Facebook for you. One, I'll be posting a mini timeline of the events leading up to Bruce's murder and the murder itself, give you a refresher in case you want to call in with a voicemail. And 2, I'll be posting a list of all the suspects we've discussed on the podcast thus far, so that you have a list to review when you call in to leave your voicemail. In next episode, we'll be hearing from Danny again, as I catch him up on the investigation and ask for his opinion on some of the factual disputes that we had last time we spoke. I'll see you next time in The Confidant.